some opposition back home to your meeting with Saudi leaders this week. What will you say to Saudi leaders, specifically to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, about the Khashoggi murder and other human rights practices? And if I may, Prime Minister Lapid, how close are you to an agreement with Saudi Arabia to gain overflight rights, and should we expect that soon? Thank you.
With regard to the question you asked me, my views on Khashoggi have been absolutely, positively clear. And I have never been quiet about talking about human rights. The question the reason I'm going to Saudi Arabia, though, is much broader, is to promote U.S. interest. Promote U.S. interest in a way that I think we have an opportunity to reassert what I think we've made a mistake of walking away from, our influence in the Middle East. I'm going to be meeting with 9 other heads of state. It's not just it happens to be in Saudi Arabia. And so there are so many issues at stake that I want to make clear that we can continue to lead in the region and not create a vacuum that is filled by China and or Russia against the interest of both Israel and the United States and many other countries. And so the purpose of the visit is to coordinate with 9 heads of state what are in U.S. interest, and I believe in Israel's interest as well.
Well, let's the Prime Minister.
I always bring up human rights. I always bring up human rights. But my position on Khashoggi has been so clear. If anyone doesn't understand it in Saudi Arabia or anywhere else, then they haven't been around for a while.
Latest news, Saudi Arabia headliner. Israel and Saudi Arabia courtship grows, but Riyadh plays hard to get. Israel's ambassador to Egypt had a message to deliver to the guests gathered at Cairo's Ritz-Carlton in May 2018 to celebrate his country's Independence Day. The Middle East was on the cusp of change. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was steering it. This week, U.S. President Joe Biden, on a regional tour aimed at securing more oil production, is expected to push Riyadh on a timeline for upgrading ties with Israel. But he will be told that Saudi Arabia, which views itself as the guardian of Islam's holiest sites and a leader of the Muslim world, is still not ready, the Saudi official said. Publicly, Saudi officials have repeated that normalization with Israel would only be possible if it settles its conflict with the Palestinians. Riyadh, which engineered a 2002 initiative that promised normalization with Israel in return for a Palestinian state, says it stands by that position. Comparing Saudi Arabia to a prospective bride, one source familiar with the royal court's thinking said the kingdom would need a significant gesture. Quote, "You need to propose with the diamond wedding ring, and that is a substantive step forward on the Palestinian issue. The kingdom has a special Islamic and Arab standing that it will not burn, and the Israelis should not think that they can steamroll Saudi into normalization with cosmetic changes," end quote. But the courtship appears to be gathering momentum, with both Israel and Saudi Arabia signaling interest in better ties. Biden is expected to emerge from the visit with an agreement between Israel, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia on the presence of multinational forces on 2 Red Sea islands that Egypt transferred to Saudi Arabia in 2017. Saudi Arabia, which agreed to follow civilian overflights from Israel to the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and India, is set to open up its skies to more flights. The kingdom is also expected to deepen its clandestine intelligence sharing and security ties with Israel as they face their shared foe, Iran, said a Western diplomat. Tehran has backed Houthi rebels in Yemen who have attacked installations in the kingdom while fighting against a Saudi-led military intervention. Prince Mohammed has gone so far as to describe Israel as a potential ally. Change in tone in Saudi Arabia, once famous for its ultra-conservative brand of Islam, said voicefully anti-Semitic school textbooks, has even percolated down to Saudi television. In one show, a Saudi man says the country should make peace with Israel while describing the Palestinians as ungrateful. Headliner, Biden defends Saudi Arabia visit despite Khashoggi killing. President Joe Biden on Thursday defended his decision to hold an upcoming meeting with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, despite prior insistence that he would spurn Saudi Arabia and its de facto leader for the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Biden insisted at a press conference ahead of his trip to Saudi Arabia later this week that his feelings on the Khashoggi murder may have been clear, as have his broader record on human rights. The president repeated his assertion that the purpose of his trip to Saudi Arabia is instead a broader meeting with regional Persian Gulf leaders to address energy and security concerns. The president's trip to the oil-rich kingdom, where he will also meet with leaders of Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Iraq, and Jordan, comes as gas prices have spiked across the United States, peaking earlier this summer at a nationwide average of more than $5 per gallon. National Security spokesman John Kirby said last month that increasing oil production would absolutely be a topic of discussion when Biden meets with Saudi leadership, as will destabilizing regional behavior from Iran and the kingdom's involvement in the ongoing war in Yemen. Looking to temper criticism from the Saudi trip, Biden administration officials met early this week with Khashoggi's widow, Haman Elatz Khashoggi. A representative for the widow would only say that she met with senior officials, not Biden himself, but relayed the broader content of what was discussed. That's the latest news, and now my thoughts. I think it's well understated that the attacks of September 11, 2001 will not be a topic for either the United States, Saudi Arabia, or Israel, in which the intelligence services, and I'm talking pre-intelligence, before the attacks took place, if shared, could have prevented 9/11 from even happening in the first place. What was known by Saudi Arabia and Israeli intelligence we'll never know, because everybody that was detained by the FBI on immigration violations were all deported back to their home countries. The CIA and the NSA, although the NSA was barely questioned by two congressional inquiries, it was the CIA who basically fell on the sword, so to speak, even though they basically lied on the stand. The murder of Jamal Khashoggi has always put on the back burner. The United States doesn't care if American civilians are killed by their regional allies, because their regional allies have a vested benefit to those in the federal government, as well as people who are affiliated with those people in the federal government, corporations, as well as affluent donors. The rest of the American people do not matter, and you never have, and you never will. And unless you understand that simple fact, and instead stop fighting each other along political lines, you will never understand what is happening before your very eyes. And that is that the United States and their allies are now pushing for a multinational war against Iran and their allies, Lebanon and Syria. The Shiite minority has always been at the behest of the American military, reaping repercussions for the last 30 years because the Gulf monarchies, the Salafis and Wahhabis, the anti-Islamics, the ultra-conservatives, and the ghouls who have created Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, Boko Haram, Jaish-e Mohammed, Abu Sayyaf, and others, they're the ones who keep private military industrialists producing weapons of destruction to fight the war on terror, while the United States continually funds the war with terrorists in the shadows. As for hegemony in the region, there'll never be hegemony in the region. The Persians stand as the final army in the Middle East. And no matter who's in office, whether it's Biden or whether it's a Republican nominee, they will always serve the masters of Saudi Arabia and Israel. And as long as the Pentagon and private military industrial complexes call the shots when it comes to foreign policy and to production of war, backed by the CIA, we will never know peace.